the crystal chandeliers shimmered above me, scattering light across 1,000 frozen faces. My daughter's veil fluttered in the air conditioning like a ghost of innocence, and the microphone in my hand felt heavier than truth itself. I could taste champagne and heartbreak at the back of my throat. If you've ever trusted someone who wore a perfect smile, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because this story isn't rare. The moment I nodded for them to play the video, time fractured. Laughter stopped. Music died, and every secret in that ballroom began to bleed into the open. I stood there, trembling but calm, watching the man who destroyed my family crumble in front of everyone. That was the moment everything started to unravel. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, beneath the glittering chandeliers and the sound of laughter that didn't feel real. My daughter, Emily, stood in white lace, radiant and trembling, and beside her, Ryan smiled the way only a man certain of his victory could. I had never felt smaller than I did in that moment. When he raised his glass and turned toward me, the words that followed were disguised as charm, but soaked in venom. A joke. They called it later. But I remember the room falling silent, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on me, the flush creeping up my neck, the taste of metal on my tongue. I remember my daughter's forced smile cracking at the edges. Humiliation is a quiet thing. It doesn't scream. It settles, slow and heavy, in your chest. I stood there, still, as if any movement would shatter me completely. And then, somewhere in the middle of that unbearable stillness, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let this lie destroy her life. Not anymore. I turned toward the DJ booth. My voice came out calm, almost serene. I told him to play the video. The room seemed to stop breathing, somewhere between the gasps and the whispers. I caught Emily's eyes, wide, confused, afraid. That was the moment everything changed. But the truth didn't begin there. It began months earlier, long before the wedding, when I first met Ryan. I've lived in Charleston my entire life, long enough to know that peace is something you build, not something you're given. After my husband passed, it was just me and Emily. She was 10 then, a bright, curious girl who used to fall asleep beside me on the couch while I worked late shifts as a nurse. Those years were hard, but they were ours. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night and secondhand Christmas felt like a promise I made to her that she would always feel loved, no matter what we lost. Our house was small, but full of warmth. I can still picture Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee, the radio humming in the background, Emily sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table, drawing dreams on old newspaper margins. We had our little rituals afternoon walks by the harbor, strawberry pancakes when one of us had a bad day, quiet prayers whispered before bed. She was my reason to keep going, my proof that love could survive even the cruelest ending. When she brought Ryan home, I wanted to believe my prayers had been answered. He was polite, handsome, confident, everything a mother would hope for her daughter. He spoke with easy charm, remembered every detail, and looked at Emily as if she were his whole world. But even then, something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way his smile never reached his eyes, or how he always turned a conversation back to himself. Small things, so small I told myself I was imagining them. Still, I caught myself watching him, the way he'd place a hand on Emily's shoulder, just a little too firm, or how he'd dismiss my stories with a grin that didn't quite hide irritation. It wasn't enough to call suspicion, but enough to unsettle my heart. Mothers know when the air shifts. We feel it before anyone else does. I told myself not to worry, that Emily was happy, that I should be, too. But sometimes, the quiet between people says more than their words ever could. And in that quiet, I felt something beginning to change. Something I couldn't name yet. But that would soon unravel everything I thought I knew. It started on a Tuesday morning, one of those calm, forgettable days that somehow end up changing your entire life. I was at the farmer's market, picking out peaches, when Mrs. Delaney, a sweet woman who owned the flower shop downtown, mentioned she'd seen Ryan having lunch with someone. She said it casually, smiling, assuming I already knew. His boss. I think. They looked close. Her words didn't land all at once. They just sat there, heavy, as if the world had paused to see what I'd do with them. I remember forcing a smile, nodding, pretending it didn't matter. But all the way home, my chest felt tight, like my heart was holding its breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself it was silly, that Ryan was probably just having a business lunch, but something inside me, that quiet, stubborn instinct mothers never lose, wouldn't let it go. By morning, I decided I needed to know, not to accuse, not to cause trouble, just to know. I drove to his office downtown and parked across the street. The late afternoon sun was sharp, bouncing off glass and metal, turning everything too bright. After an hour, I saw him, Ryan, walking out with Victoria Monroe, his boss. Their hands brushed, then lingered. She leaned in, laughed, and he kissed her, not quick or uncertain, but the kind of kiss that comes from familiarity. For a moment, I couldn't move. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I remember thinking, absurdly, that maybe I had imagined it, that maybe the air itself was lying to me. But the camera in my lap didn't lie. I raised it, hands shaking, and took the pictures. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. That evening, I told Emily. My voice was steady, but my heart wasn't. I showed her what I'd seen, what I'd captured. She looked at me the way a stranger might, eyes full of disbelief and something worse, disappointment. She said I was jealous, that I couldn't stand to see her happy, that I was trying to ruin her life. I didn't argue. There's no winning against love when it's blind. She left that night, slamming the door, and the silence that followed was unbearable. I sat on the edge of my bed, the photographs spread beside me, and realized the truth had cost me everything. That night, I understood something I'd been refusing to see. I had lost my daughter long before the wedding. The days after Emily's rejection blurred together. I kept trying to reach her, soft messages, quiet apologies for things I hadn't done, anything to bridge the distance between us. But every time I reached out, it was Ryan who answered, even when it wasn't his voice. He was there in the pauses, in the tone of Emily's words, in the way she repeated his phrases like they were her own thoughts. He was good, too good. He didn't fight me openly. Instead, he painted me as fragile, confused, unable to let go. He told her I was worried and emotional, and she believed him because that version of me was easier to live with than the truth. Friends who used to call stopped showing up. Even my sister, who'd always been on my side, began to sound cautious on the phone. It was as if my name had quietly become a warning. Meanwhile, Emily started asking for money, small amounts at first, then more. She said it was for the wedding, that Ryan was covering most of the expenses, but she didn't want to burden him. I didn't argue. I just wrote the checks. Every time I handed her an envelope, I felt something inside me being taken too. Nights were the worst. The house felt colder, emptier. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the framed photo of Emily and me at her college graduation, trying to recognize the girl who used to call me her best friend. I started questioning myself. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I'd misread everything. That's what manipulation does. It turns certainty into fog. But fog can only hide the truth for so long. One night, after hearing that Ryan had been traveling for business again, I finally called a private investigator. It felt like betrayal, even though I was the one being betrayed. A week later, I got the call. Ryan wasn't just unfaithful. He and Victoria Monroe had been running a financial scam for years, using charm and deception to drain families, including mine. My checks to Emily had been redirected, funding their affair and their debts. Every dollar I'd given in love had been pocketed in deceit. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. I just sat there, the silence thick around me, and felt something hard and steady settle in my chest. They thought they'd broken me, but what they'd really done was give me a purpose. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I told myself to breathe. It was supposed to be simple. One evening of peace before the wedding. One chance to show Emily that I was trying. I even wore the blue dress she'd once said made me look graceful. I arrived early, holding on to hope like it was something I could still keep alive if I just smiled enough. From the moment I walked in, I could feel it. The air shifted, polite but cold. Ryan moved through the crowd like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing too loud, whispering in corners. He looked at me once across the room, and that small, satisfied curl of his mouth told me everything, whatever story he'd told. They'd believed it. He was clever. Every time I spoke, he found a way to make it seem like a performance. A small comment about wedding costs became a jab about how I couldn't let go of control. A story from Emily's childhood twisted into proof that I was jealous of their happiness. Each laugh that followed didn't sound cruel, but it cut just the same. I could feel the blood rush to my face, my hands trembling under the table. I tried to speak, but my voice felt swallowed by the room's polite discomfort. Even Emily avoided my eyes. That was the moment my heart broke, not from Ryan's cruelty, but from her silence. The rest of the dinner blurred. The clinking of glasses, the low murmur of sympathy-laced gossip. It all sounded far away, like I was underwater. I left early, smiling through the ache, because falling apart in front of them would have been his final victory. When I got home, I sat in the dark kitchen, the air thick with everything I wanted to say and never could. The humiliation was complete, but beneath it, something stronger began to form, a stillness that felt almost sacred. I realized I couldn't save my daughter by pleading anymore. The only way to save her was to show her. If truth was my only weapon left, I would sharpen it until it cut through everything. The wedding day was perfect. The kind of perfection that only exists when everyone's pretending not to see the cracks. The church smelled faintly of lilies and champagne, sunlight pouring through the windows like forgiveness. Emily looked radiant, almost unreal, her hand trembling in Ryan's as if she could sense something was off, but didn't know why. I sat near the front, still as glass, feeling both invisible and unbearably exposed. Every smile around me was rehearsed, every toast too polished. When Ryan leaned down to whisper something to my daughter, I felt the same hollow ache that had haunted me for months, that terrible knowledge sitting beneath my ribs like a stone. But beneath it, too, there was calm, the kind that comes only when you've already lost everything worth protecting. When they called for speeches, I stood slowly. My knees ached. My heart didn't. The microphone felt heavier than I remembered. I began softly, words about love, about my late husband, about the kind of faith that makes a mother believe her daughter will always be safe. I could feel Ryan watching me, confident, smug, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I paused, let the silence stretch long enough for the room to breathe in. Then I turned to the DJ and said, in the same steady voice I'd used to comfort patients for 40 years, that I had something special to share. A video. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. At first, a soft hum of laughter. People expecting a slideshow of baby pictures or family memories. Then came the footage. Ryan and Victoria Monroe, his boss. A hotel room. The camera's stillness made the truth sharper, undeniable. Her voice, his laugh, the sound of betrayal so ordinary it was obscene. The room froze. The laughter died mid-breath. I didn't look at the screen. I watched faces, confusion turning to horror, pity turning to silence. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Her veil trembled as she shook her head, whispering something that I couldn't hear, but felt all the same. Ryan's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but the microphone had already been cut. Somewhere, someone gasped. Someone else stood. The air broke into 100 pieces, whispers, tears, chairs scraping against the floor. I stood there quietly, steady amid the storm I had unleashed. My hands were trembling, but my heart wasn't. I wasn't proud, and I wasn't vengeful, just free. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the weight lift. Emily turned toward me then, her face pale, eyes hollow with realization. I wanted to hold her, to say that I was sorry it had to be this way. But truth doesn't wait for permission. It simply arrives, uninvited, and stays until everything false is gone. As the chaos unfolded around me, I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and exhaled. The damage was done, but so, finally, was the silence. When the screen went black, the room didn't move. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then the murmurs began, soft, confused at first, then sharper, cutting through the heavy air. Glasses clinked. Someone whispered my name. Somewhere, a child started crying. Emily's voice broke through the noise. Not words, just a sound, raw and terrified. She stumbled backward, her bouquet falling from her hands, white petals scattering across the floor like snow. Ryan reached for her, but she pulled away, trembling, eyes wide with betrayal. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to take back the pain I'd just delivered, but I knew I couldn't. The truth had already landed. Nothing could soften it now. Ryan tried to defend himself, but the room had turned against him. His charm, that slick, practiced mask, cracked in seconds. Guests avoided his gaze. Someone demanded he leave. I watched him walk out the side door, his posture collapsing with every step. For all his deceit, he looked small now, like a man stripped of every lie that once made him powerful. I sat alone as the chaos unfolded. Music had stopped, but the silence was louder than any song. The smell of roses clung to the air, thick and sweet, almost nauseating. I kept staring at the empty dance floor, at the reflections of the chandeliers flickering in spilled champagne. My hands were shaking, but I felt nothing. Not triumph, not peace, not even sorrow. Just stillness. I thought exposing him would fix everything. Instead, it only showed how broken we all were. When Emily finally looked at me, there was no hatred, just confusion and heartbreak. That look will live with me longer than any of Ryan's lies. As the guests filed out, whispers following me like shadows, I gathered my purse and walked toward the exit. The night air was cool, sharp against my skin. For the first time in months, there was no performance left, no mask to hold. I had told the truth, but as I stepped into the quiet parking lot, I understood something I hadn't before. The truth wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In the weeks after the wedding, everything unraveled faster than I could have imagined. The story spread quietly at first, whispered through the community, then picked up by a local news station. By the end of the month, Ryan Clark's name was everywhere. Investigators confirmed what I had suspected all along. The man who'd stood beside my daughter in a white suit was not just a liar, but a practiced thief. He and Victoria Monroe had been running the same scheme for years, charming families, manipulating finances, draining accounts, then moving on to the next city. My video had become the first public proof of their crimes. After that, other victims started to come forward. People who'd lost savings, inheritances, even homes. One woman wrote to me saying my courage had saved her from signing over her business to him. I read that letter twice, then pressed it against my chest and cried. Not from grief this time, but from something softer. Relief. Maybe even grace. I had spent so long blaming myself for breaking my daughter's heart that I hadn't realized what my truth had done beyond us. Justice wasn't clean or easy, but it was real. For the first time in months, I slept without waking to the sound of my own doubts. Emily didn't come right away. The silence between us was heavy, but not final. Then one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She offered it. She said she finally understood. She said she was sorry for not believing me, for mistaking love's warnings for control. She needed time, but she wanted to talk. That was enough. The world around me was still healing, but inside, something had shifted. I could finally breathe without guilt clinging to every exhale. I had learned that truth doesn't destroy love, it purifies it, and sometimes survival is its own form of justice. Maybe justice doesn't fix the past, but it makes surviving it mean something. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it felt softer somehow, quieter, kinder. The air in Charleston carried that faint salt smell again, the one that used to drift through our windows when Emily was little. Months had passed since the wedding. since the storm that tore through our lives. And for the first time, I could feel the world settling back into rhythm. Emily and I didn't rebuild all at once. Healing came in fragments. A short text at first, then a phone call that ended in silence, then another that didn't. Eventually, one Sunday morning, she showed up at my doorstep with coffee and that same hesitant smile I'd known since she was 5. We sat on the porch swing, watching the azaleas bloom, talking about everything except what had happened. But the pauses between our words held understanding. The distance between us had changed, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was space for forgiveness. I learned that peace doesn't come when things are fixed. It comes when you stop needing them to be perfect. I stopped replaying that night in my head. Stopped wondering if I could have done things differently. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over pain. Again and again. Some days, I still catch Emily staring at me like she's trying to read the years she missed. Other days, she laughs, really laughs, and it's enough. I don't need the past to vanish. I just need to see her happy, living her truth. I walk every morning now, same path by the marshes, same gentle breeze. Sometimes Emily joins me. We don't say much. We don't have to. The quiet between us feels like home again. This whole experience taught me that love without honesty isn't love at all. Truth can break things, yes, but it can also rebuild them, stronger, cleaner, real. Maybe you've been in a place like that too, where doing what's right meant standing alone for a while. If you have, I want to hear your story. Tell me below. I read every word. It's been more than a year now since that day. The wedding, the truth, the unraveling. Life looks ordinary again from the outside, but inside, everything feels quieter, lighter. I no longer wake up with that ache in my chest or replay old conversations, searching for what I could have done differently. I've learned that peace doesn't come from forgetting, it comes from understanding. I don't regret telling the truth. It cost me comfort. Yes, for a while. It even cost me my daughter. But it gave me back something I didn't realize I'd lost myself. For so long, I had carried guilt like a shadow, afraid that doing the right thing made me cruel. But courage isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's simply love, choosing honesty over silence. Forgiveness found me slowly. First, I forgave Emily, not because she hurt me, but because she believed in love the way I once did. Then, I forgave myself for the years I doubted my own worth. And eventually, I forgave Ryan, not for his lies, but to free myself from the weight of hating him. Holding on to bitterness doesn't punish anyone but the one carrying it. I've come to see that truth doesn't destroy love. It reveals whether it was ever real. It tests the strength of the heart, the depth of trust, and the meaning of forgiveness. And when all is stripped away, what's left, if it's still standing, is the kind of love that can't be broken. So now, when I sit on my porch and watch the sun dip behind the marshes, I think about how far we've come. Not just Emily and me, but every person who's ever had to choose between peace and pretending. What about you? If it were your family, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know your story.